Hello, and welcome back to Talking Sit, the podcast that spills the kibble on our furry, feathery, and even scaly best friends that we share our homes with. I really hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. I've had two fantastic guests, and this week is no exception. I have the wonderful Alyssa Ralph. She is a canine nutritionist and a clinical animal behaviourist. So, we are going to be talking a bit about feeding your dog behaviour, and of course, lots about poop because there is a lot to learn about poop, let me tell you. If you are enjoying listening to Talking Sit, please make sure you subscribe and leave a review if you can. That will help me spread the word and do tell your family and friends as well. So, here is my interview with Alyssa. Okay, welcome to my guest this week. This is Alyssa. Hi, Alyssa.
Hi Jade, lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Can you please introduce yourself for anybody who does not know what you are? Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so my name's Alyssa, as Jade's already said. I am a clinical animal behaviourist and canine nutritionist. So I really specialise at the interplay of how our dogs act and how they do the things that they do, but also what feeds them, what fuels them, and how their food drives those different behaviours that they might be throwing out into the world.
Amazing. And just something I ask all guests, what pets do you currently have, Alyssa, if you have pets?
Currently got one dog, sadly just the one dog, but he is, my light and joy. He's called
Oh,
Dougal. He is a little Heinz 57, but he looks like an overgrown cockapoo, but with like
gotcha.
kind of small greyhound proportions. Like he's got a really long back, really weird legs, just all out a bit weird. Used to be nicknamed Danger Cloud because he came to me with quite an extensive bite history.
Nice. What's his background?
So he's rescue. He's a bit of a weird rescue in that we actually know quite a lot about his previous homes. He
Hmm.
was initially relinquished when he was 10 months old, and he was with what I believe to be a childminder who left him unattended in like a garden of 5-year-olds, and he bit one of them. So then they took him to be put to sleep, and then the vets essentially just went, "We're not doing this." It was poor management. Sent him to the rescue. Rescue looked after him for a couple months, then rehomed him to a family of 4 with another dog. I think he bit one of their dogs and one of their kids. And so the same thing happened again, and then he ended up in foster, and then he ended up with me. So he's being passed from pillar to post, really.
Okay, I just had my laptop die for no apparent reason, so we're jumping straight in. We've had a little introduction to Dougal. Oh, he sounds super cute, and it's nice that you were able to give him that like additional chance that he needed. And am I right to assume I'm sure it wasn't all completely smooth sailing, but once he was in the right home and managed correctly, he's been an angel, I expect.
He's been a little superstar. Yeah, we've definitely had bad days and good days, and it's been a trek. We've had all sorts of issues with his back. He had IVDD. We've had to do surgery and all sorts going on. But yeah, it's been a roller coaster, but I wouldn't change it for anything.
Oh, bless him. Yeah, I suppose with that long spine, that's possibly going to be something that you come across. Okay, so jumping in a little bit then to what you do. So obviously you're a clinical animal behaviorist like myself, and we are gonna talk a little bit about behavior, but we're focusing mostly on the nutrition side of things today. Can you tell me a bit about what that job is? And obviously I know that will overlap with cab a little bit, but yeah, for listeners who didn't know that was a job or have never heard of that before, yeah, what does that involve?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do it a little bit differently to a lot of kind of just straight up nutritionists because I kind of sit at the crossover of the two. It's really quite like niched in. But I think for like your average nutritionist, they're dealing a lot with like what your dog eats and dealing with maybe some more like clinical conditions like pancreatitis or kidney failure, that kind of a thing. I deal more with kind of the food element of a behavioral issue. So if a
Mhm.
dog's coming through to me, like typically this is the kind of case that I'll see, is they're coming to me and they've got like a persistent phobia or anxiety or reactivity or maybe even like intra-household aggressions, like biting the people or the dogs in the house. but they've tried typical like behavior modification and it's not working, and we're looking to go a little bit deeper. And so it's, you might go down kind of the physical health route and you might be looking at, is there musculoskeletal pain? Are they a bit sore in their joints? Or you might go down the nutritional route and go, is their diet suiting them well? Is there maybe some digestive discomfort going on? Are they feeling okay from what their digestive system is doing? And also from like a physiological point of view. So a lot of kind of what we feed our dogs goes on to create, the hormones, the brain chemicals like serotonin can all come down to what we're feeding our dog. So I really sit on that little kind of platform, I guess, and I talk to people about how they can feed their dog better to really support them with the behavioural issues that they're experiencing, and it just really complements that behavioural modification plan that they might be dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, we'll go into more detail about how the two interlink. Just for anybody who, I don't know, maybe a new dog owner or has just been on one food forever, give us like a 60-second summary about dogs, their optimum diet, and any kind of important things about their digestive system and how they deal with food, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, dogs have a really similar digestive system to us. Like, a lot of kind of the main points are the same. There's just like nuanced differences. The optimum diet really looks different for every single dog. And there is always going to be like an element of trial and error in there of finding the right diet that works for your particular dog. Variation is always really helpful. Variation can really support the gut from all sorts of elements. Like, not only are you giving it loads of different things to break down and absorb, but you're also supporting what's called the microbiomes, all the different microorganisms that live in the gut. You're supporting that to really be healthy and happy as well. Generally, like, fresh food is kind of like the epitome. Moving towards fresh would be like ideal for so many different reasons. So like a fresh, properly balanced, formulated home cooked diet would be like amazing. Unfortunately, that's not possible for most of us because it is just so expensive and it's time intensive, and it's just we cannot just dedicate all day every day to cooking these amazing meals for our dogs. So it's really trying to find the balance of what works well for your dog but also what works well for your lifestyle. And so it might be, you're feeding your dog a kibble. There's nothing wrong with that. There's an awful lot of vilification of kibble out there, but there's nothing wrong with it. You can work with it really well. And you can kind of look at different compositions. You can work out, how much protein works for your dog, how much fat works for your dog, what kind of proteins work for your dog. And you can just get creative with it, get experimental, and you can try lots of different options to really work out, okay, how is my dog functioning on all of this different food? What felt best for them, because they'll be telling you in how quickly they eat their food, how keen they are for their food, but also like how they act day to day. Are they more irritated after their meal, or are they maybe a little bit more anxious overall? Are they a bit more fidgety overall, or are they really settled and just being like the perfect angel that you'd maybe want? Obviously, not every dog is perfect. I have to caveat that. Every dog will have some issues and bugbears that we're always going to have to deal with, but as close as you can get to it, and you're just tweaking it and going to see kind of what really works for them as an individual. It's just like us, not the
Yeah,
same diet rules for all of us.
absolutely. And I think something that is important to get across from this episode is that it's not, in my experience with my own dog, with talking with you, with customers' dogs, sometimes there's an easy fix. And if you're like me, you are over 2 years in and you're still working on it and you're kind of getting close to perfect, but suddenly, I don't know, he eats, what's he had recently? Like, oh, I thought I'll just give him a bit like these novel goat chews, and then bang, the skin flares up, and you're like, for God's sake, just yeah. So my dog is on a dog food called Omni. If anybody wants to pay for advertising, Omni, you're most welcome. Um, he's on Omni Sensitive, and it is vegan. It is devoid of any things that you would think that a dog needs in their diet, and it is the only thing in over 2 years that has settled his gut and his skin.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I just wanted to make the point, and I'm sure that you feel the same, that it's often not linear, is it? And it's not quick for most dogs.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it can be such a journey, and it's the difficulty, when we are dealing with individuals, with all the science in the world behind us, it's not going to work for every single dog out there. And it's always going to be a bit of trial and error. And you can start with what you think is most likely to work, but I guarantee it's not going to work for every single dog. And so you then got to go, okay, what do we think we might need to do next? And you just keep plodding on. And it's all you can really keep doing is you just keep trying. You can use, like I say, best guesses to try and make the process faster. But
Mhm.
sometimes it does stretch on because you've got to really work out what's working beyond kind of what we can see
Mhm.
when we're talking to people and when we're just living with the dog day to day. We can't see what's going on a cellular basis. We just have to guess and hope.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many things I could just jump into, and we could talk about in more detail, because before having these issues with my own dog, I wouldn't have had a clue that it was so varied in terms of all the different options and possibilities and all the rest of it. So it's become kind of like a geeky thing with me and Cheddar. But hopefully I can tie it into some questions that I've actually planned to ask you, so that you're not here for the entire rest of the evening. So we'll come back to some stuff. So let's say when I was growing up, my granddad, I grew up with dogs, he was a dog trainer, and he would have just gone with bang pedigree £5 bag of kibble off the supermarket shelf, never thought twice about it, none of us ever did, and everybody around him would have been doing the same thing, right? Why do you think in the last 10, 20 years pet food has become this humongous conversation, and why feeding dogs looks so different now than it did back then?
I think genuinely, I think it's partly education and partly society and society pressures. I think from an educational point of view, we know so much more about what food does in the body, and that's for both people and dogs. Like, it's not just dog specific. The way we feed ourselves has changed so much in those decades as well.
Yeah, that's so
So
true.
I think we understand it on a different level now. Like we understand how it creeps into every aspect of life. It's not just diet is diet and that's it. We know it impacts long-term health, longevity. We know it impacts emotional regulation. Like, it makes sense for us to lean into it. And I think kind of the growth of the pet food industry is really just reflecting kind of our choices as consumers. And so many people were really starting to understand what food meant a little bit more, kind of what could work for dogs, what maybe didn't work so well for dogs. And there's really been that surge in demand to feed and do better by our dogs. I think partly as well, we're seeing so many more issues with our dogs because we are putting them under so many different strains of society. Like, society is vastly different to what it was in the 80s. And it's how we work and treat our dogs. Like, they're so different. And I think it brings to light so many more nuances in their well-being that maybe we didn't think about before, because, you know, back then you could just have dogs that would pop out of the house and roam the street for a bit, and we all kind of had, you know, some semblance of sensibility to not bash into the dog while they were eating and all of that. But we don't do that anymore. We have a lot more pressure on our dogs.
Yeah, yeah,
Um
absolutely. And I wonder if, well, I think you are being very, very kind and, what's the word, optimistic about the reasons why. But I think you're trying not to say the fact, hey, pet food is this massive money making
yeah.
conglomerate now, right? There's a money to be had in pet food. And I think that's probably the other side of it. It's the same with humans, I guess, isn't it? All the supplements and protein shakes and everything else that buy for ourselves. I think, yeah, it's just become this metropolis, hasn't it,
Oh,
of
absolutely.
financial opportunity.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there are some people out there that are doing it really well and are actually like living and breathing their marketing claims. Some companies that are just making really lovely foods. The vast majority of them are definitely doing that. And there are all sorts of inflated claims and just straight up false claims about what their food can do. And it's really disappointing. But yeah, you're bang on the money. So many companies have really kind of spiraled it. They've created all sorts of different flavors and whatnot for different conditions that don't really have much of an impact. And it is just like a marketing thing. Like, there are so many companies these days that have like breed specific diets where
Yeah,
the biggest change is the kibble shape, and it's just like
yeah,
it's not needed. And it is
yeah,
just
yeah,
a marketing ploy, and it's disappointing, to be honest. But I think, again, it's part of society. You get to a point where you just look
yeah.
at society, get so disillusioned with it.
Yeah. So are you trying to claim, Alyssa, on this podcast that Prosecco, the non-alcoholic dog Prosecco, has no nutritional value and is not an important part of your dog's daily diet?
I would say it's not an important part of their diet for sure. I think, products like that would always come down to, I guess, human culture as well. Like it's not anything that the dog would go out and feel they need to celebrate something with a glass of prosecco. I think it comes down to, maybe we're looking more at the human animal relationship and how we form relationships with our dogs and what we feel is important in that bonding time. I think we could really dig into the psychology of that if we wanted to get geeky with it. But yeah, I don't think the dogs necessarily need it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. It sells though, someone wants it somewhere. And this ties in nicely to my next question, which is, do you think that the boom of social media has harmed or helped the way that we feed our dogs?
it's it's a little bit of both. I hate to be that person, but it
That's
is
okay.
like, it depends on where you hang out on social media. I think there are some really great pages and groups that are really educational, that really help people to understand their dog's food better, support them in just kind of getting this ideal health situation from their dog. And there's all sorts of specific health condition Facebook groups that give really good information out that can be really helpful. But equally, there's an awful lot of judgment and shame and slander on social media. And, just a couple of years ago, there was a hashtag trending on Instagram that was hashtag kibble is murder. And it's just making people feel,
What?
yeah, like it was
Oh
huge. And it's
God.
just making people feel like, am I allowed to swear on this?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
It's just making people feel like absolute shit.
Yeah.
Because if kibble is what works for you and for your dog, and that's where you're stable, absolutely carry on with it. You can do so much great stuff with kibble. And yet this whole campaign was going around just going, no, if you feed your dog kibble, you are killing them, you're giving them cancer. And it's just absolutely horrendous, the level of shame that is out there, because everything gets just made to the extreme. And people are just going to feel shame regardless of what they're doing. Like, I've seen people that are feeding really good quality diets that are expensive, they're time intensive, whatever, and there's always something that maybe isn't quite what someone else thinks is perfect, and they will pick up on it. There's very much this culture on social media of nitpicking and going in for the tiniest
Mm.
little details that realistically don't matter.
Yeah, and not that this is really to do with social media, but in terms of the fact that people would have the audacity to pump a rhetoric like that out is from a humongous place of privilege as well, particularly Western privilege. I don't know if you've been out to volunteer with any sort of street dog charities, but whenever I have in the past, they will generally feed them a diet of like rice and veggies and like some meat stock, because obviously meat's expensive, so it will be bones and offal and that sort of thing. And then whatever kibble they can get their hands on, and they will ask you if you can to come with a donation of kibble. And you're buying for, in a sanctuary that I worked at in Thailand, 400 plus dogs, or in Sri Lanka, the infinite number of street dogs out there. You're not going to say, okay, well, sorry, I need to buy, I don't know if I should say a brand on here, but I'm not going to go premium chicken breasts, like roasted chicken breasts. Like, these dogs need to eat. And how lucky we are in the UK and in other Western societies to be able to be fussy about those things. But at the end of the day, it's more important they just eat, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we see this a lot in terms of cases that come through as well, is that so many people will be worrying about what they're feeding the dog and missing the fact that their dog's refusing the higher quality food anyway. And so we
Yeah.
can sit here and, I'm going to say in inverted commas objectively, because it is all subjective to a degree, but we can sit here and say a food on paper is high quality, and so it should be giving your dog health benefits. If your dog isn't eating that food, it's not what that dog needs or wants. And so you are just throwing money away for no good reason. And so many dogs actually do thrive on what we would deem a lower quality diet. Sometimes that is genuinely the best thing for them. And it is something that I think we can often forget when we get so wrapped up in the science that's around of how we can make everything the best possible thing, that we do forget about the individuality of it, and that actually every dog does have their individual needs. Some dogs genuinely want something that, is like 80% carbs that they can just burn through, digest easily, and use as an energy source. Sometimes
Yeah.
that is best. And we can't sit here and go, absolutely not, you're not following the textbook, because they're a living being. And yeah, I think you're very right. I think it does come from a point of privilege that we don't appreciate fully, I think, what we have available to us here in the UK. We do have so many options. And I think we might get there in the future, because obviously with the cost of living going absolutely bonkers, dog food's getting really expensive, and I'm seeing so many people having to change what they feed their dog because they simply can't afford what they used to. And we have to find that balance. No wonder if maybe we will see that point of privilege changing over the coming years,
Mm.
as we start to just go, you know what, we've just got to do what we can. It doesn't have to be the best. It's just food, and food is food.
Yeah, it's like pet food banks, right? In places like Dogs Trust during the cost of living crisis, they had pet food banks. And again, if anybody's worked at rescue centres in the UK, they'll know, we do our best to get the most appropriate diet, but sometimes the dog's just got to eat. And so, it has what it has. And I think, yeah, it's really interesting because lots of people on paper would say that the food that Cheddar's on is, there's no meat in it. So, they always say meat should be the first ingredient and all of this. It's the first thing that's not made him shit himself. So it's perfect for him. And I used to work for an unspecified pet shop company in the UK. And they sort of pride themselves on their nutritional knowledge, which at the time, because I was being taught it by them as an undergraduate student, all made complete sense. Protein should make up 80% of the meal, or sorry, like it should be like, 80% real protein, and it should be as close to fresh. We shouldn't have any like meat meal in the food, all of this stuff. And it makes complete sense until somebody tells you, well, actually, there's no fucking evidence to say any of that stuff anyway. So it's very frustrating because it's pushing an agenda that yes, will work for some dogs, as you say, but just not all of them. And it makes
Yeah.
people feel like crap, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think there's enough in the world that makes us all feel like crap. We don't need to be looking at the nitty-gritty of what we feed our dogs and feeling crap because we can't do, what someone down the street is telling us we should be. And I think it is just, again, it's the individual of the dog, but it's the individual of you as well, like what you can afford, what you can find, what you can get reliably.
Mm.
And there's so much that goes into the picture that I just think we shouldn't be out here judging everyone for what we're all feeding our dogs. It's such an individual choice.
They used to reward us as well for actually converting people onto one of these foods in the shop. And I know from my own clients, when they're in a position where they feel like somebody's talking to them from a position of knowledge and knows better than them, they can find it difficult to say, oh, actually the vet's put me on this diet, so I'm going to stick with it. It can be really hard to stick to that conviction, can't it? And not feel like you're not doing enough and, oh, okay, I better listen to this person because otherwise I'm neglecting my dog.
Mm.
I'm going to
Yeah,
get off my
absolutely.
soapbox in a second. So actually, again, all of these are sort of tying in really nicely. Next question is, what are the biggest myths do you think that are circulating about dog food right now?
Oh my god, there are so many. um, I would say like one of them is that raw is the best possible diet for every single dog out there. I think we've also got, the dogs can't digest grains and that grain free is inherently better. We've got one that's all about how higher protein can create aggression. There's so much misinformation going around. And I'd have to probably jump on there and go back to the kibble is murder thing, that kibble is the worst thing on earth for your dog, because it's not. And I'm probably a little bit controversial in saying I'd rather a dog was fed a complete kibble than an unbalanced raw. So
Yes, you
it's
heard it here first, folks. Hold the raw thought because we're going to have a raw chat in a second. Can you
yeah.
tell me and the listeners about grain free? Like, what is the
Yeah.
myth and what is the real picture?
Yeah, I mean, so the myth is that grains are bad for our dogs, that they can't digest grains and that they have no purpose in a dog food and can actually make health conditions worse. And so that's why we've got like loads of grain-free options on the market. If you actually look at the timeline, it came a few years after there was a big human rise in gluten-free and looking at gluten-free diets for people, because obviously there are people out there, I'm one of them, with a gluten intolerance that do need to kind of steer away from gluten. But for the general population, gluten in small and moderate doses is fine. Obviously you don't want to be eating gluten nonstop all day every day, but in small doses it's okay. But when we had that fad of gluten-free for everyone in the human population, a few years later, we saw the same thing in dogs. And they were going, well, we can't have gluten and grains for our dogs, and carbs are evil, and we should stay away from them. But actually, dogs have been domesticated anywhere between the last 10 to 100,000 years. Like, the jury's still out on that one, but a good
Hmm.
chunk of time. And for a lot of that, they have been eating our scraps as a human civilization. They have been kind of being fed whatever they can get from our meals around campfires and whatnot. And as agriculture bloomed, our dogs were also adapting to eat what we could grow in agriculture. They can absolutely, for your average healthy dog, they can digest and absorb grains absolutely fine. So it's generally not a problem. And in fact, things like brown rice, like whole grains, have so many really useful vitamins and minerals in them that they can actually be really beneficial for health. And by cutting them out completely, we can often see some deficiencies that we might need to, resupplement in synthetically if we can see the deficiency, or we might just
Wow.
miss it altogether. And that's where we get an awful lot of imbalances coming through, is by missing out grains and some of the minerals that they actually contain. We can end up in some hot water. But they can absolutely digest grains, and it's just become this big myth that they can't. There are some dogs out there that do have grain intolerances and that can't eat grains without having all sorts of different reactions, but they aren't the majority of the population. And on
Hmm.
the whole, dogs are perfectly capable of eating grains.
Great. Well, yeah, that's good to hear, because if I told Cheddar that he couldn't share a piece of toast with me anymore, I think he'd leave. That's his favorite thing. Yeah, he like I like the elbow is what I call it, the end of the bread. And when he
Yes,
sees
yum.
that, he knows it's go time. He knows that he's having some. Okay, so back to raw then.
Mhm.
Some behaviorists, and I am doing little finger commas for anybody who is listening and can't see the video, put dogs onto a raw food in an effort to cure behavior problems. And I have in fact heard this whilst working at Dogs Trust on the telephone line. People have paid 200, 300, 500 pounds to see a behaviorist, and they have literally said, well, it's the food. The dog needs to go onto raw. What does the science say? And what is your opinion on this?
Yeah, so I mean, raw can be good for some dogs. It's not the fix all and the cure all that I think it's been purported to be. And it can have really good benefits for a load of different reasons, but also fresh cooked has a load of different benefits that sit alongside it. From a behavior point of view, we can absolutely have behavior problems from a nutrition perspective. Oftentimes it's not just the food, often it's the food in combination with, environment, learning history, all sorts of other bits and bobs that go into it. So it's never okay to just change the food and not do anything else. You should always be working kind of from a whole animal approach and do everything
Hmm.
kind of in little bits stitched together. You can't just go, oh, your dog's aggressive, just change the food and everything will be fine.
Hmm.
In terms of the diet, we can absolutely see that diet can contribute towards these behavioral issues. And from a science point of view, we can see that from a few different elements. There was a string of papers over the last kind of like 2 and a bit decades looking at what's called tryptophan, which is an amino acid that basically the body then converts into serotonin. Now, we've all heard of serotonin, we know it from a human health perspective. It does a very similar job in dogs. And we know that, anxiety, emotional regulation is linked to neurotransmitters, including serotonin. So it makes sense then to think, okay, well, the food can go into that. If we're eating more tryptophan, then maybe there's more serotonin. It doesn't actually work like that. And I think that's part of the problem with the science at the moment, is that the science that's been looking at the level of tryptophan in the diet, the level of protein in the diet, it's all using completely different compositions of protein. So it's not just how much tryptophan is in there, but tryptophan competes with a load of other amino acids to get into the blood brain barrier, so get actually into the brain. And we can all
Hmm.
end up with all sorts of imbalances there. So first off, just eating tryptophan isn't enough to go, it will go on a 1-to-1 ratio and create that much serotonin on the other
Hmm.
side. So there's that discrepancy in there. There was also no consistency in these studies about what they were feeding those amino acids alongside. And we've got other studies from other models to say that actually how we feed tryptophan and the rest of the meal really massively changes its absorption and therefore its ability to go and change into serotonin. And so we've got a few papers out there that are suggesting, higher protein can contribute to aggression. We've also got some out there that say actually it's lower protein that contributes to aggression. And there just isn't this consistency across the board. And if you actually
Yeah.
look at all of the studies individually, they've just all got such varied methodology that we can't draw any clear conclusions from any of them. And so what we really need to do is like take it back to clear controlled environment lab studies where we can really start to understand it on a much deeper level. So the science from that view is kind of out. The science that we do have that is more compelling is from rodent models. Again, we do have a lot of similarities between, how we feed mice and rats and how that impacts their emotion and behavior. And we can draw a lot of those similarities into dogs, but we're yet to get those same studies in dogs.
Mhm.
But there is more coming out from a microbiome perspective. So again, that's all the little microorganisms in the gut. And we are starting to see that, a fresh based diet, be it raw or fresh cooked, can change the microbiome and bring it into alignment with what we'd see in a more healthy dog. So there is that element. Now, before we take that to mean, oh, well, kibble is bad for the microbiome, you can also start to undo those effects by adding, fresh veggies into their diet just a couple of times a week and have massive
Mhm.
impact. But we were seeing that the microbiome is more evenly balanced in raw and fresh cooked dogs. However, from a scientific perspective, again, we also didn't have the same composition between the kibble and the fresh and raw food. The fresh and
Mm.
raw was naturally higher in protein. And so in some of those results, people are saying, oh, well, it's the higher protein that's caused it. But we don't know if it's the higher protein or if it's the preparation method, the fact that it's less processed, which we know is related to certain types of bacteria anyway. And so we've got so many different moving parts that
Yeah.
we cannot say that a dog with behavior issues will categorically be better if they are on a raw diet. It is
Mhm.
something that, could support better behavior and better emotional regulation in some dogs, but not every dog. And it's always got to be part of a bigger plan. And I would very much argue that probably more dogs would benefit from a fresh, lightly cooked diet than a raw diet from a microbiological perspective. And again, hugely controversial topic, but all the science that we've got out there is really pointing towards raw does have microbiological risks that we have to be aware of.
Yeah.
And there are so many people out there that refute that from an anecdotal perspective. But when we're looking at, the science that has sample sizes of several hundred at this point, they're all saying there's a microbiological risk here. We do have to take that into account, and we do have to recognize that sometimes raw is not the best thing for an individual dog as well. I have worked with a
Mm.
couple of dogs that have been on raw, and it really didn't sit well with them. They were really upset from being fed a raw diet, and as soon as we'd switched them over to a cooked diet, those symptoms went away, and it was the same protein. It was just how it was handled before it was fed to the dog. And so it's,
Mm.
again, understanding the individual and knowing that there is no one size fits all for our diets and our dogs.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And again, I also know dogs that thrive on raw, and that's great. For anybody who doesn't know, my dog has a strange kind of skin condition that is not just kind of like a straight up cut and dry type of skin condition that we're sort of investigating. And I paid a lot of money to see a holistic vet who put him onto a raw diet, and within the week, his skin had flared up worse than I'd ever seen it. And it just goes to show that it's not the magic fix. Like, I appreciate what you're saying, that there are many, many dogs who will thrive on it, but I think it's important for the listeners to understand that it's not like every dog is best on raw, and if you're not feeding raw, you're not good enough or you're failing or whatever it is. I don't know about you, but I went through I went through this phase of like spam commenting on those TikToks of somebody that's like, they feed like a lick mat with like an ostrich's egg and a chicken's head and like a pig's leg and then some blueberries and then they like sprinkle something on the top. And I just felt the need to keep going on and commenting like, everyone in these comments who is not doing this, you are also valid. This does not make this person like a superior dog caregiver just because they have the time and the money, because that shit costs money,
Oh,
and the
yeah.
resources to do this. But it's very easy for people to feel inferior because they're not providing this glamorized type of food that they think is the correct food.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly it. And I see so many of those kind of plates and bowls going around on social media that aren't complete. And I think it is important to note, for the odd meal, that's absolutely fine. But if you are feeding that consistently day in, day out, or kind of just relying on rotating proteins or whatever, the chances are your dog's going to have a deficiency as well.
Hmm.
You need to be using like formulated recipes, which will typically have a degree of supplementation in there. And I think if you're not getting that, you are very likely staring down the barrel of a deficiency that will lead to a health issue. And so, actually,
Mm.
feeding a complete diet is the most fundamental thing that I do see get a lot of people get wrong in the raw feeding world. And
Hmm.
it is heartbreaking because I see so many people coming to me with dogs with issues that once we, complete the diet and we round it out and we give them all of their minimum requirements for vitamins and minerals, all of a sudden they can actually thrive again and they're in control of their emotions again and they can think more clearly. And it is just such a shame that we've got so many dogs out there in these states of deficiency.
Yeah. And before we move on to everyone's favorite topic, which is dog poop, I am aware that we're 40 minutes in, and some people will be listening to this and going, I've got even less of a grip on dog food than I had when I started because, all this information completely disagrees with social media and whatever else they've been told. Do you think there's a way that you can give me like a 60-second, here is what you need to think about when you feed your dog, concentrate on that and build from there? And then we will put Alyssa's details in everything so you can go and chat to her. But I just think maybe a little summary for anybody who's now feeling like completely confused would be really helpful.
I think first and foremost, you've got to kind of decide what category of food you want to be giving your dog. So, is it raw? Is it fresh home cooked? Fresh commercial? Is it kibble? Is it wet tinned? Picking which one of those works best for you. Like, you can feed multiples, but pick maybe the main one that feels the best fit. So, if you travel a lot with your dog, if you like to go camping with your dog, kibble's probably a lot easier for you to transport and travel around. If you're on more of a budget, kibble tends to work out as a lot better cost for or cost per calorie value. So it's usually a lot cheaper compared to what you have to feed your dog to actually get them enough nutrition. Versus things, like raw takes up a lot of storage space. You need to be kind of on it. You need to be thinking ahead a lot more. You generally need to be in one place a bit more to be able to feed it successfully. So it's thinking about what your lifestyle looks like, picking the right type of food that will work for you, your budget, your lifestyle. Once you've got that down, you can start to understand little differences that might make a difference in your dog. But the first thing you want to be looking for is what brands and what diets are available in that category that are complete, that actually say complete on the label. And you've got two types of food. You've got complete and you've got complementary. And this comes down to what our dogs need from a minimum and a maximum requirement to sustain long-term health. And it's all sorts of we've got the European committee called FEDIAF that looked after the ones in Europe. We've got AFCO do the ones in America, and then we've got global ones by NRC. But essentially what you're just wanting to look for is that it says complete on the food. If it says complete, it's got everything your dog needs, you know that you can feed that as a core diet and not have deficiencies unless there's something going on with your dog's digestion. So that's what you're looking for. The next thing, consider what types of protein your dog likes. Maybe if they have any intolerances, think about that. But some dogs naturally like things like beef and lamb more than they do chicken and turkey, or vice versa. Or if your dog likes fish. And you can also experiment. You don't have to just stick to one food. I think this is also something I see a lot of people mistakenly believe, is that once their dog is on a food, that has to be it. They can't change their dog's food. They can't rotate their dog's food. And actually, you absolutely can. You might need to do it a little bit slower the first time that you introduce it. But once your dog is used to a food, you can absolutely feed a different couple of types. My dog rotates through about 5 or 6 different foods, depending on my mood, his mood, what we've got in, what's available. And he just will fluctuate between them. That's absolutely fine. So really, I'd say get your category of food right. Make sure it's complete. And then find something that your dog likes and enjoys. And if you notice that there's an issue going on, then you can always have a little bit of an experimentation and say, okay, is it the protein type? Is it the carb type? Is it the composition? Or you can hook up with me or another nutritionist and we can talk you through that process and coach you through it all if it's just making your head go a little bit fuzzy. But I'd say that those are the main things that you want to be focusing on. And if you get those right, 90% of the population are going to be absolutely fine.
Amazing. That's great advice. Thank you. I will try to not make this question last 30 minutes because we could be here all night knowing what we both do. How does the gut affect dog behavior and how important is it?
It is really important. I feel like it's been died down in terms of how important it is because we didn't have the science to back it up for quite a while. But there's been an absolute bloom in science over the last year alone in terms of how gut health impacts behavior and emotions. And that's, it's in dogs, it's in humans, it's in rodent models. We're seeing it across loads of different species. But it is really important. And I think from a behaviourist standpoint, I think both of us, Jade, have seen this explosion over the last few years of people going, if there's a problem behavior, we need to consider pain, and we need to be looking at, okay, is the dog in pain? And we had all of this science that was coming out going, there was this paper by Daniel Mills that came out that said, up to 82% of cases of problem behavior can have pain underlying. We also need to remember that pain doesn't have to be musculoskeletal. It can be visceral pain, so it can be pain associated with the digestive tract. That might be, the diet's not working well for them, the microbiome's unhappy, maybe got some overgrowth going on. But I think it's really starting to take hold in the last year. We've seen so much about the microbiome in specifics. So we're starting to see actually the microbiome has a massive correlation with behavior in terms of anxiety and aggression, particularly. And we are starting to see some causative studies coming out in terms of how modulating or changing the microbiome can then change behavior and emotion regulation. So we're starting to see more and more come out that at this point we really can't dispute the importance of diet. Like, it is becoming so core. I think it needs to be considered whenever we're dealing with a problem behavior, or even when we're just thinking of, teaching a puppy basic things. We also want to make sure that they've got the physiology behind them to be able to make really strong memories and learn properly. Wow. And just be in a good state of mind. So I think it is really, really important. In terms of how it happens, there's a few different pathways. The main one is we need to consider the gut-brain axis, which is how the gut and the brain talk to each other, because they are constantly talking to each other, and it's what we call bidirectional. So the brain talks to the gut talks to the brain. It's like a little telephone wire between them. And how they do that, they do that through at least a few different options. The main one that most people talk about is the vagus nerve. And this one became really popular kind of around the pandemic, I think. A lot of people were talking about, polyvagal theory from a relaxation point of view. And we can kind of like spitball off of that, and we can look at the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is called the vagus nerve because it's Latin for meandering or wandering. And it goes through so much of the body. It has so many hundreds of different connections. It's crazy. But one of the big ones is that it connects all of the gut into the brain. And so much goes along the vagus nerve that they are constantly talking. And so we've got neurotransmitters traveling along there. We've also got kind of the circulatory system and all the hormones that are going between the gut and the brain all the time as well. We've got, integrity of barriers between the gut and brain can really play into it as well. So we've got a few different barriers. So we've got like the blood-brain barrier, we've got what's called the choroid plexus barrier, which separates out the cerebral spinal fluid. So without trying to get too technical on it, we've got a few different barriers that sit between the gut and the brain that keep everything that should be in the gut, and everything that should be in the brain in the brain. And when they start to get a little bit faulty, we can have issues there. But they do have channels that the right things can navigate between gut and brain quite happily. So we've got like a few different ways that they're talking to each other. And in an ideal situation, they're talking to each other all smoothly. Like I say, everything that should be in the gut is in the gut. Everything that's in the brain is in the brain. And they just send out little messages to each other quite happily. But then we can end up with issues, and inflammation is one of the key things here. As soon as we end up with systemic inflammation for whatever reason, some of those barriers can start to degrade, and we can end up with what's called essentially like leaky tight junctions. So the cells butting up to each other essentially like fade apart, and they have a little gap between them. And all of a sudden, all the things that should be staying on one side are getting through to the other and being transmitted here, there, and everywhere in the body, and just causing havoc. And that's the thing that I see an awful lot, because, once we get inflammation into the body, it can be really hard to actually get rid of it, especially from kind of my area of expertise, which is the microbiome, which is where we get this gastrointestinal inflammation. It can allow those more kind of damaging bacteria that naturally live in the gut to get a little bit outside of their own boots and they can start to grow a little bit too much. And the more that they grow, the more they make it more of an inflammatory condition in the gut. And so they grow more, and we end up on this really horrible cycle where we just end up really down a garden path somewhere in this horrible state of inflammation that we just can't get on top of. And then that inevitably creates anxiety issues and reactivity issues. So there's an awful lot that goes into it. And when it's healthy, it's working great, brilliant. We can optimize it, we can tweak it, we can do whatever we want to. Or it goes badly, and we end up with a gut that at some point has had a challenge that it's really struggled to bounce back from. We've seen a lot of dogs in the last couple of years that have historic giardia infections, for example, that just create havoc in the gut microbiome. and create all sorts of other downstream issues that then manifest in anxiety and reactivity. So there is an awful lot in terms of how the gut impacts the brain and how that impacts emotional regulation. I've not even got into yet about the synthesis of neurotransmitters and hormones, but I probably will save that for another day because I think that might be a little bit too in
Maybe
depth.
maybe we'll get you on for part two. I'm thinking in the future when I'm rich and famous and I've got, millions of fans, we'll have like a Patreon and there can be additional episodes and we can talk more about this. I feel like such a dumbass sitting here talking to you. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, let's just make sure your dog doesn't shit itself. Well done. That's basically the extent of mine. Is there a possibility for anybody who, again, is sat at home thinking, oh God, that kind of does sound like my dog, but again, haven't got to poop yet, but can these things be missed by vets as well?
So much. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really sad how much it can be missed because they often kind of present in more kind of little grumbles that go on for a long time. And I think it can be really, really hard to be able to find that in the length of a typical vet consult. Like a typical vet consult is what, 10-15 minutes,
Mhm.
and it kind of has to be. It's the same as, general practice for human medicine. It's the general practice that we are trying to signpost and deal with quite a lot in a very short space of time. And so being able to ask the right questions can be really, really hard. And dogs can mask all sorts in a vet clinic as well, as you'll be well aware from, behavior and pain anyway. And so it can be really difficult for vets to kind of lean into that side of things and really dig into the diet. I've had it myself when my own dog Dougal has struggled with nutritional stuff and diet stuff. And, he went through a spate of spontaneous vomiting. And in the time that we had in the consult, we couldn't talk in depth about what food he was on. We just didn't have that time available to
Mhm.
us. And so it can be really, really easy to miss it and get distracted. And there can be so many different kind of red herrings going on as well that might take attention away and make it go, oh, well, it can't be a diet issue, it's a this issue. And I think I see that an awful lot in kind of those more itchy dogs, as I'm sure you've kind of experienced with Cheddar, is that when we're first dealing with itchiness in our dogs, we'll be looking at very much skin based issues. And it can take a little while before people start to go, okay, I think it might be a digestion issue or a diet issue. And even once you start off on that pathway, it can take a good chunk of time before you start to understand which element of it is the right piece of the puzzle to fix that individual dog. It takes more time than I think we have really in a
Mm.
typical vet consult.
And I'm gonna finish up with some quicker fire questions, I think, but who knows? Because this wasn't even on my list. But for anybody who's listening, I would say 50%, if not more, of my customers have dogs that struggle with anal gland issues. What's the first thing or first three things that we should be doing in that sort of situation?
First thing, looking at consistency of the poop. So a lot of dogs with anal gland issues will have softer than typical poops, and so they're not expressing them naturally whenever they go to the toilet.
Okay.
So you want to be looking at what's making their poops go too soft. For a lot of dogs, it will be fiber. So we can then start to look at what's the fiber content of the diet, and we can increase that. So we've got two types of fiber, soluble and insoluble. Both are really important. So you might want to do a mix of those two fibers and just add it into their diet. And that's usually a good starting point. So, just a tablespoon of ground flaxseed for your average 20 kilo dog would be great. If you've got a smaller dog, half a tablespoon. If you've got a bigger dog, double it. But ground flaxseed has both soluble and insoluble fiber in it. So just adding that into a food can help just see if it's a fiber issue, because that should make the poo go firmer. And then you should be able to see when they go to the toilet, they'll have their little poop, and then there should be a little drop of liquid that pops out of their bum just at the very end. And that should be the anal.
Gorgeous.
I know, isn't it delicious? And that should be them expressing themselves naturally. So that's ideal. If we don't think it's a fiber issue, I would then be looking at, is it a dietary intolerance? Because
Mhm.
dietary intolerances can absolutely feed into it. So is it always when they have a particular meat or protein type? So is it always when they're fed chicken? Is it always when they're fed beef, for example? Or is it something a little bit more kind of out there? Maybe they get goat's milk every now and again. Is it that they have an intolerance to goat's milk? But just start thinking about when it's happening. The other thing as well to think of, if it is loose stool, is the impact of stress. And stress can really create havoc again on the gut. It can speed everything up and make the poo all sloppy. It's what I delight in calling panic poops. And if
We've all
we
been
end up
there.
with
We've all had
exactly.
it.
And if you end up with that kind of on a persistent basis, then it can mean that they're not expressing their anal glands properly again. So you want to be looking at the emotional welfare of the dog and make sure that they are dealing okay and they've got lots of opportunities for rest if they need it. But I'd say those are the top three that I'd be looking at.
Amazing. And what is healthy poop, Alyssa? I'm not talking about human poop. What is a healthy dog poop looking like? Because I am horrified at what some people think is normal dog poo when I have
Yeah.
to say, my loves, I love you. Dog poo should not look like this. Okay, what's a
Yeah.
healthy dog poo?
I have to say again, a lot of similarities to humans. So if something is coming out of your dog's bum that you would go, oh, if that was coming out of mine, I wouldn't be so happy about it, that is your first red flag. Because we have kind of a scoring chart in humans, which is called the Bristol stool chart. We have a very, very similar chart for dogs. And we have it called a couple of different things. We've got it called the Waltham stool chart or the Purina fecal score chart. But essentially, it rates your dog's poo based on its consistency. And you're looking for this firm log that has a smooth or very slightly cracked surface. So you don't want it to look like lots of little rabbit poos stuck together. That's a bit too dry and too hard. And you don't want it to be a log that leaves like a slimy residue behind. And you don't want it to be losing its form at all. As soon as it starts losing its form, it's way too soft. So you want to be kind of aiming for that kind of middle consistency, which is very pick upable and doesn't leave behind any trace. A little bit of, condensation on the pavement is absolutely fine, but no actual like poop smears as you pick it up.
Yeah.
And then you want to be looking for that mid-tone brown colour. A little bit lighter, a little bit darker is usually okay. But if it starts fading out
What kind
from
of
that colour,
handbag are we talking about? What kind of like this it just immediately came to mind, sort of like, hey, you're looking for like a medium tan leather. No, darker than a tan, right? We're looking for like a natural dark leather kind of colour, right?
exactly, like your average brown leather jacket. Like I feel like that's like
Nice.
quite a dark brown, quite rich, maybe mahogany toned is fine.
Nice, nice.
But you don't want any kind of red in it. You don't want it to be black. If it goes white, most typically that's from bone content. So if you're feeding raw and that happens, it might just be a bit more bone is in that meal. If it goes green or orange, that's also a sign that maybe something might be up. So you're really looking for that brown tone, just middle of the road brown is ideal. So really, it should look like a little log that you're picking up off the floor. And if it's not, be a little bit concerned about it.
And if it's consistently not, we want to investigate, right?
Absolutely.
Let's
Yeah.
say it loud.
Yes, absolutely. If you're getting, the odd abnormal poop that doesn't look like that, maybe once or twice a week, that's okay. It might be worth looking at the pattern of when it does happen to understand why it's happening. But if you are getting it consistently, like at least daily, where it isn't that perfect shape and colour, you absolutely want to be talking to someone about it to really start to understand what's going on because that's not normal and it's not healthy.
Nice, excellent. So, who should you talk to? Are we going to the vet first, Alyssa, in this sort of situation?
Yeah, vets are always kind of the greatest place to go to, especially for signposting. So they'll be able to help you with kind of any top of the road things that they need to just rule out first. So if it's anything kind of concerning, they'll be able to help you. And if they can't help you or they think it needs deeper work, they'll be able to signpost you out to maybe a nutritionist, maybe an internal medicine specialist, maybe someone else that can help you for the specific issue that you're dealing with. But vets are always the best first port of call.
Excellent news. And obviously, we'll link to you anyway. I send like 50, 60% of my customers a recommendation to see you. I know, obviously, everyone can't do everything and they've already
Oh,
got recommendations to do everything, but Alyssa is very easy to book in a call with, and I would highly recommend doing so if you do have a dog with loose stools. Okay, if people listening to this episode could take away just three things from today, Alyssa,
mhm.
what would they be?
I mean, it's very apt for us to go down the route of make sure your dog's poo is healthy. I think we,
Hmm.
we need to finish on that one. Make sure they're on a complete diet, I think is a really pivotal thing. And also just make sure that you're doing you and it works for you and your dog. Don't listen to what everyone else is screaming at you that you should or shouldn't be feeding. Do what's right for you and your dog and try and shut out all of that external noise. I know it's hard, but if you can, do.
Amazing, that's great. Is there anything you would like to plug, or at the very least, can you just tell everybody where to find you, Alyssa?
Yeah, I mean, nothing I really want to plug this year because I'm doing a lot of professional CPD stuff this year. So I'm working with a lot of other trainers and behaviorists. But if you want to find me, I am still taking on clients this year. So you can always hop over to the website, which is holisticpetservices.co.uk. And you can send us a little note saying what you want to talk about. You can book in a free call and we can chat to you about kind of what issues you're dealing with and what might be the best solution. That might be working with us, it might be going off to see someone else, but we're very into signposting on those calls so we can get you the right next step to take to actually start seeing some progress.
Amazing. This has been fascinating. I will definitely have you on again for infinity questions part two.
I mean, I can talk to you for hours.
Hopefully, it's got people thinking and some people that are going to take some steps towards healthier guts in their dogs and maybe even themselves in this new year. So, yeah, thank you so much for your time, Alyssa, and I will speak to you soon, no doubt.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Wow, that was the wonderful, intelligent brain box that is Alyssa Ralph. I hope you enjoyed the interview. I hope you learned something. I hope you are going to change some habits. I know I did when I met Alyssa, and I hope that you're going to share with your friends and family so that we can all be taking better care of our dogs' digestive systems. Once again, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you download, you subscribe, you leave a review, and tell everyone all about it. I will see you next week for another episode of Talking Sick. Have a great week, guys.